The International African American Museum is making progress. Today, I talk one-on-one with former Charleston Mayor Joseph P. Riley Jr., who's spearheading the fundraising part of the museum for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Mayor Joseph P. Riley Jr., welcome back to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Great to be back, and you're doing a great job. You really have a lot of energy and cover a lot of topics and touch a lot of people. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I really do appreciate it. Well, let me jump right into it, and let me ask you the obvious. What's new and what's now with the International African American Museum?
Well, the museum is going great. You know, the construction is moving right along. I got a couple of statistics for you. The masonry subcontractors have so far laid 20,000 brick, or 14%. So if you go by there, you can see a very handsome brick. The mortar is drying a little bit, so there'll be a little lighter tone to it. And then the construction inside is robust. So it's really going great. And then the team is working hard. All the exhibit planning work is moving forward, and it's a very active place.
And let me go back down memory lane with you, Mayor, because I want to know this. Who was the African American person who initiated the idea of the African American Museum coming here to Charleston?
Well, I proposed it. I read the book Slaves in the Family by Edward Ball, and for the first time in my life, I understood the seminal role that Charleston played in African Americans being brought here as enslaved people, and it was so prominent in terms of the substantial proportion of Africans coming to Charleston, coming to the United States, that it was important that we tell the story here, a story that isn't told. So I read the book, I guess, in 1999, and it was published in late 98. And then, so in early 2000, at my inaugural address for that term of office, I announced the proposal of having an African American museum built here in Charleston.
And when you proposed that particular idea, who, as far as stakeholders in the Charleston area, as far as African Americans, did you collaborate with?
Give me that again, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and when you proposed this particular new museum, the International African American Museum as we know it right now, who did you collaborate with in the African American Museum on your idea?
Well, we brought in a lot of people, people from the community, all parts of the community, and a lot of the people that are engaged in the museum right now, and then city council members. So it was we had big meetings and people from different parts of the community, and everyone was so receptive. We knew it was ambitious and it was going to cost a lot of money. What we knew this, Quintin, that it wasn't going to be diminutive. This was an important story in the history of our country, so we had to treat it in appropriate scale. So it means it took a long time to do and a very substantial building to build, but it needed to be something of size and scale that would be powerful and inspiring. And that is indeed what we've done. It's taken us over 20 years to get this, but that's okay. Just important initiatives and big events and big museums or whatever takes a while. Don't worry about that. And then we didn't know exactly how much money we'd need. End up, we've raised $113 million so far. But it's what the country deserves, and what the descendants of enslaved Africans who came to our country deserve. A place where this story, a story of difficulty and courage and persistence and suffering and achievement and so much more, can be told. And then, of course, we were fortunate with the research that was done by great historians, we found out where the original wharf was, And then with just good luck and good, strong persistence, we were able to acquire the land where part of it was the original Gadsden's Wharf. So as Dr. Lonnie Bunch, who was head of the National African American Museum of History and Culture in Washington, said, he said, Joe, your site, our site, is one of the most sacred sites of African American history in this country. And then he corrected himself. He said, no, in the Western Hemisphere. It's one of the most sacred sites of African American history in the Western Hemisphere. So we had the amazing opportunity to build a museum on a site so rich in that history.
Yes, sir. Let me stop you there, Mr. Mayor. Okay, I know that the International African American Museum is really a sacred space in many people's mind. Will you all feel comfortable in the future when it's actually built to have private parties on that sacred space?
Well, it will be open during the day. I mean, be filled with activity during the day, and I think that it would not be inappropriate in the after hours to have have it rented. People pay. The museum will require a lot of money to maintain and for maintenance and upkeep, and then whoever goes to the event has a rich learning experience. So I think it's probably better that it be actively used rather than be quiet when people would like to use it.
Actively on sacred space?
Pardon?
Actively on sacred space?
Well, sure. I think
Okay.
even you're still observing and you're observing and you're respecting what is there, and so I think that is appropriate.
Okay.
To have people use it, and if you're there, then all of the wonderful historic exhibits that are present, people are there. They're sitting around. They're watching the video and the introductory movies, and then all of the wonderful parts of history, the Center for Family History, and all of that. So it'd be a learning experience, and for the museum, a stream of revenue that will allow us to be first rate and continue to provide splendid programs.
Okay, and a matter of fact, let me jump into it because let me ask you this. Why and when and by whom was the decision made to call the project a museum, but not to have a permanent collection of artifacts like most museums or facilities for housing borrowed collections?
Well, the museum will be collecting exhibits, and of course the most important exhibit is where the museum is. So, a lot of times you have museums and you go out and get artifacts and then create something, but
Right.
we actually, our most important artifact is where the building is and the harbor that it looks out over, and the entrance to the Atlantic Ocean and the pathway to and from Africa. So I think we'll, that will happen in time, and we'll have interesting exhibits is a part of the storyline, and it'll be very exciting.
Yes, sir. And let me ask you this. You talk about entrances and you obviously talk about the harbor. What arrangements have been made to accommodate increased traffic onto very narrow streets at the site, or for flooding, or for compatibility with private residents nearby?
Well, the museum building is up high. It's not going to be flooded, and then the traffic pattern of the city will enable people to use it and to get around. So it'll be another part of the city that has historic places, and it will be easily accessible and then connected to other parts of the city.
Yes, sir. And you obviously, let's stay on that area, Concourse Street. Many decades ago, we obviously heard about the rumors about alleged contamination on Concourse Street. What was the cause for that back then?
What was the cause?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What it was was the housing that was there was built on what had been a coal degasification plant. That is, that you would bring coal in and burn it, and that would create gas. And then the residue of that burned coal was a carcinogen. That is, it was dangerous, and it had cancer-causing components. So that wasn't known, for a long time, and we, long after the coal gasification plant had ceased to exist, we actually were digging there to begin the city's drainage system and to dig trenches. And when they dug, they were confronted with this very foul-smelling material. So it was tested and found out that it was just what I said. It was a residue of the gasification plant, and it was cancer-causing. So what then we had to do was cover it up and cap it. So over that is several feet of clay material, and that covers it so that you're not going to, you wouldn't be digging around it. It's, it's covered, it's protected, and it's used by the public without any danger.
Yes, sir. And I'm going to get back to that in just a second. But let me ask you this, too. How many local African-American organizations and citizens concerned and are obviously knowledgeable about African and African-American studies that have been consulted in planning this particular museum?
Oh, a host of them. From the very beginning, at every meeting we had public hearings. And so, everyone from the Avery Institute to, to scholars. So it was always a public participation. So actually the museum exhibit plan flowed from those early meetings and input and suggestions and, from citizens. So it's steeped in the history as well as supported by that early interest and discussion.
And how have their recommendations or criticism been incorporated into the current plans?
Well, we were always listening, and it was always a continued product of people's ideas and input and suggestions, as it should be.
Yes, sir. And I look like I'm losing you in the camera frame, but let me go on. No worries. Oh, there you go. That's perfect. And can a museum be? Yeah, that's perfect right there. Oh, actually, you might have to tilt back up a little bit, just a hair.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. That's right. Yeah, perfect right there. Yes, sir. And let me ask you this: can a museum being used to bring tourists into Charleston be able to enjoy Gullah Geechee culture and convey the horror of human bondage and suffering?
Absolutely. Well, the museum has to tell the truth. That's the purpose of it.
Perfect. Yes, sir.
To tell the truth, the unvarnished truth. So the truth is harsh and heartrending, and it's also inspirational because the stories of courage and persistence and fortitude and resilience are in the museum. So it will be, a hard story in many ways, the truth, but the old saying, the truth will set us free. It's what we need to know as citizens of the world, and certainly citizens of this part of the country. And by doing that, then we honor those who were brought here in chains under the harshest of circumstances, and they and their descendants built and shaped this country.
And now the history of the past and present racial oppression apparently did not end in the 19th and 20th centuries in Charleston and throughout the African diaspora. Does the museum plan to inform visitors of the ongoing and local global discrimination, or present a picture of everyone as getting along now that the problems have been really identified and in some people's minds?
The city, the museum,
Yes,
the
sir.
museum will have continual changing exhibits and plenty of opportunity for public engagement and participation. So it will not be a dead space, it will be a lively space. So plenty of places. We have a wonderful changing exhibit gallery that will be a place for, meetings, discussions, and things like that.
Now, does the International African American Museum reflect important local design elements of the African or African American culture?
In what way do you mean, Quentin?
Yes, sir. The local design elements, does that reflect the African American culture as you know it?
Well, the museum, what is contained in the museum will do that. The building was designed to house a large collection. And so one thing you don't have in a museum is a lot of windows. And also the great architect who designed it said that it would be purposefully unrhetorical. That is, that the building structure itself is quiet. The museum is what tells the story. And I think he was absolutely right. You kind of come up with some idea to do something with the exterior of the building, and it really doesn't do service, and it's hard to create the quality that was intended. So the building is quiet. Then on the grounds, very moving exhibits, as you know, that will portray the books, figures that were etchings or descriptions of what it was to be like in the hulls of those ships, and lots of other moving components. So you will the site will be emotionally impactful and moving, and that's that as it should be. So rather than come up with details on the building that might try to do something, the building is quiet. The power of the building is the site, and then the power of the museum and what is portrayed is in it.
Okay. And from my research, Mayor, almost no African American business are located in the historical district near the proposed site. What conversations have the International African American Museum, that is, have had with the Charleston Chamber of Commerce to ensure that money from tourists visiting the museum can be spent in nearby African American businesses?
Well, we expect and hope that will occur. We had to, first of all, raise the money, Quentin, and get the building built. And that's the first thing to do, and that's what we're doing now.
Yes, sir. And you talked earlier about the Family Life Center. I know a Family Life Center.
What?
Oh, yeah, the Family Life Center at the museum. I know that it will assist people in finding their ancestors, and it will also have an opportunity to address serious emotional and economic issues about family connections in recent as well as long time ago.
Yeah.
Does the museum have ethical plans for addressing issues such as mixed race genealogy and land rights?
Well, the Center for Family History, as it's called, will present all of that, and it will continue to unfold, and so you'll learn even more about people who were brought there and their families and their descendants. And one of the enslaved Africans who were brought in chains to Gadsden's Wharf was the paternal ancestor of Michelle Obama's. So we'll have many of stories like that to tell, and connect with people that we know about, or help families that didn't know their family history and find out that they had ancestors who were brought to Gadsden's Wharf as enslaved people.
Yeah, and this might be a tough question, Mayor, but to what extent will the museum be an advocate for addressing controversial topics regarding racial and human rights that could be considered uncomfortable to many?
Well, I think all of that is on the table. The museum exists to tell a story, and then in telling a story, it exists to enable contemporaneous discussion of what's going on. So, and which most museums, good museums, do.
Yes, sir. And how does the museum plan to address the history of moral, social, and economic inequity?
Well, that will be done in exhibits, and we have, as I mentioned, a changing exhibits gallery.
Right.
And the purpose of that is so there's always something new and fresh. So, it may be an exhibit one time of some a special interest in a contemporaneous discussion or debate or controversy. So there's plenty of room for that.
Now, what does the museum plan to do to educate all visitors that the continent of Africa was the cradle of humanity and that all human beings are descended from that continent?
Well, the museum starts with Africa, obviously, and so there'll be, a great learning experience. Many people have never really contemplated Africa, where it is, how large it is, the various diverse cultures that once existed there, from whom the enslaved Africans were brought. So it will be robust, a great, rich, evolving learning experience.
Now, let me go over to the board, obviously your board. Let me ask this too. If the majority of the international African American board members are not African American, how can the museum legitimately claim to be an African American institution representing the culture and history of that particular group of people?
Well, we have a lot of board members who are African Americans. The chairman of the board is an African American. The vice chairman is an African American. The treasurer is an African American, and we have, lots of, as I said, board members and people engaged who are African American, and then we have people who are not. And it's a diverse board, as it should be, because this is something for the whole community and for the whole country.
Now, since African and African American people have the longest history among all the people on the earth, why has the museum decided to concentrate on such a limited time span?
Give me that again, Quintin, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. I know that since African and African American people have the longest history on among people on the earth, according to my research, why hasn't the museum decided to concentrate on such a limited time span?
Well, I don't think the museum is fixed on any particular time span. It will be, as I said, there'll be changing exhibit galleries, and so there might well be an exhibit at one time with a much earlier, African history and stories. It will be robust, a continuing learning experience.
Now, to what extent were long-term economic and cultural benefits to African American and African American communities considered in the planning of this museum?
Well, we were envisioning that it would be a benefit to everyone, and the first goal was to find a place to build it, then what it should be, how big it should be, what it would cost, how to find the money, and all of that. So, there were a lot of steps in the process.
Now, you talked earlier about obviously that contamination that happened allegedly back there on Concord Street decades ago. How's the land like now?
The land is protected. What happened when the coal degasification residue was discovered, which is a carcinogen and had to be capped, then the land was covered with a layer of clay and protective processes so that you couldn't access the contaminants. So it's covered and secure.
And when was it capped?
When?
Yes, sir.
Well, probably in I guess 20 years ago or so. There were various activities on the site over the years and shipping activities and those, but over time, and then when we acquired the land where the museum is, archaeological studies were done, and then the Department of Health and Environmental Control came in and advised what needed to be done to protect the land and protect people.
And what was that criteria?
The criteria for what?
After you all acquired that particular land?
Well, we acquired the land a good while ago. Actually, the owner had planned to build a high-rise hotel, and we didn't think that was a good idea, so we acquired the land, and then where the International African American Museum is, that precise spot, which is where Gadsden's Wharf was,
Right.
when we discovered what it had been, we contacted the then current owners and asked if they would sell the property to the city, which they did, agreed to do so commendably. They had plans for other uses in a restaurant, and so we were able to acquire that,
Now,
make sure that we had the unusual opportunity to build a museum of African American history on the spot where such a historic use of it occurred.
when the previous owners wanted to build a high rise, and the city basically said, "Hey, that's not a good idea," was the land contaminated then?
Well, we did not know the land was contaminated
Okay.
then. And we
Okay.
found out when the land was contaminated, and it might have been around the same time.
Okay.
But when we started the major drainage initiatives in the 1980s, I guess, whenever it was, that's when we discovered the contaminants, because they started digging trenches to begin putting in the drainage improvements. And that's when it was discovered that there was a very foul smelling material. And in fact, they brought a bag of it in our office to, because I wanted to make sure it was really as bad as they said, and
Right.
it was very memorable. And so then we sent it to the State Department of Health and Environmental Control, and they confirmed what in fact it was. And so it had to be dealt with accordingly.
Now, what exactly were those other drainage initiatives?
I beg your pardon?
Yeah, what were those other drainage initiatives? Oh, you're getting out of the camera again. But what? Yeah, there you go. What were those other drainage initiatives?
Well, we began in the 80s with a master drainage plan. And so one of the first major drainage improvements was called the Meeting East Bay Drainage Improvement, and it was to treat an area from Meeting Street up to Mary, and then down below Calhoun Street, and then over to the water. And what we started thinking that you could just handle it with the normal trenching and dealing with it like that. And but the benefit of gravity doesn't exist in the soil in the city. And then we realized that the soil was contaminated. Then they had to design a new system where tunnels were sunk 140 feet, and then down to 140-foot level, and then tunnels dug, and then a pump station. Actually, the pump station exists on Concord Street that would then receive that water that would go down to the 140 feet and then pump it out treat it and then pump it out to the harbor.
Now, let me ask you, I know you all raised a lot of money recently for the museum. How much of that money have you all gotten that really meets the minority guidelines?
Well, the building, the construction is exceeding the city's goals for minority business development. It's the goal is at 20%, and it's exceeding that.
And how much percentage is that right now? And where do you want to go in the next year or so?
Well, the contractors are working now, so we will continue with that same level. It exceeds our goals, and we're very proud of that.
And you know a lot about monuments around Charleston and beyond. What is that one most powerful African American monument that you know of here in Charleston?
Well, you I would need to think about that a minute. What is the most, obviously, churches and, the, places or graves where people are buried and, but I think the museum will be the most significant monument.
Okay. Yes, sir. Well, the Honorable Joseph P. Riley Jr., thank you so much for your time. And again,
Well,
welcome.
thank you very much and continued best of luck.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope to have you
Okay.
back on Quintin's Close Up soon.
Look forward to it.
Yes, sir. Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you.